some people may make the mistake of associating sexual revolution and sexual
exactly, that's
libertinism with capitalism.
Exactly.
Capitalism, and actually it happened earlier in socialism. But they had to react because they were realizing that the demographic results of that revolution in the family and the sexual morality were being disastrous. And the communists killed a lot of people. They did these horrible massacres, the Holodomor and the massacres of the Stalin's purges and so on. They killed many people, and then there were many children who were not being conceived because of the contraceptives, because of abortion, and so on. It has been estimated that in Russia, in the 20s, 70% of pregnancies ended in abortion. It's incredible. So Stalin understood that the Soviet Union was on a course to demographic collapse, and he prohibited abortion again in 1936. And then, you know, he proposed a new model of the Soviet family, which was traditional family with a new name. No? So
you know, Mises said, you may very well have free sex, but you cannot have free birth. It costs money to have children, and that's what was the other part of this.
Well said. Is there one last question? Because
yes, there is one question. I think there is a sister who wants to ask a question. She's just been waiting for this question.
I think it will be our last because we have like 7 minutes left. So please ask your question, sister.
Thank you.
Ja tak szybciutko i to nie będzie o tyle pytania, tylko ja jestem José Contreras, od kilku lat posługuję w domu samotnej matki i chciałam przede wszystkim podziękować pani profesor Jennifer, ponieważ ja na co dzień jakby spotykając się z kobietami, które znajdują się w dramatycznej sytuacji, chcą urodzić dziecko. W naszym domu przyjmujemy głównie kobiety w ciąży, chcą urodzić i trafiają do nas. I wielokrotnie jak ktoś słyszy, że posługuje w domu samotnej matki i przyjmujemy kobiety, które znalazły się w tej dramatycznej sytuacji, to różnie je określają. I zawsze próbuję tłumaczyć im, że nieważne jest źródło, tylko ważne, jak im teraz pomóc, żeby one wyszły na prostą, żeby mogły urodzić to dziecko, aby ewentualnie, jeżeli się zdecydują, wychować to dziecko. I pani profesor na początku powiedziała, że nie jest najważniejsze źródło, ale ważne, aby skupić się na tym, jak im pomóc. Także bardzo, bardzo za to dziękuję, bo mnie to bardzo tak wewnętrznie umocniło i dla mnie to jest bardzo ważne. Łza płaci.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. And I just want to mention that one of the challenges, because I've talked with other women in the United States who do the kind of work that you're doing, it's a very, there's a wide network in the United States of what we call pregnancy care centers, where they help women in crisis situations. And the problem of helping them to find a suitable mate to settle down with and get married to so that the father's involved with the child, it's very, very difficult. This is the biggest challenge. Some of the men are really not suitable. You don't want to talk them into marrying a guy because you just don't. But often when the first child is out of wedlock, the next child is also, and with a different man. And so there are many problems and complications that arise that are almost impossible. And so God bless you for your work. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And it's in miniature, it encapsulates the problems that the sexual revolution is really causing.
There's one more question. Two of them, actually.
Ja na początku tak chciałem się jeszcze odnieść do księdza biskupa Artura Ważnego na początku. Powiedział on o Piśmie Świętym i o małżeństwie w nim zawartym, że jest na początku, jest na końcu, to jest w ogóle serce i centrum. Nie byłbym też sobą, gdybym się nie odniósł do patrona, który pojutrze będzie obchodził swoje wspomnienie, czyli święty Jan od Krzyża, wielki mistyk z Hiszpanii. I tutaj właśnie na kanwie tej postaci, jego dzieła, ale też na samym fakcie Pisma Świętego chciałbym się odnieść do idei piękna. Mówimy teraz tutaj o rodzinie, mówimy dużo o ciele. Rodzina jest czymś pięknym, ciało jest czymś pięknym. Zarówno kryzys w mówieniu o dobru, o prawdzie, moim zdaniem też jest swego rodzaju kryzysem piękna, uwrażliwiania na piękno. Jak zatem właściwie dbać o piękno, to dobre, prawdziwe piękno w kulturze? Jak je budować?
It's a tough question and a very large question, but if some of you want to...
Well, you give me an opportunity to say something I wanted to say earlier, and I can't possibly go into everything that's involved, but we need to be not just cultural warriors, we need to be culture builders. So we need to have formation, intentional formation on how to write movie scripts, because I don't know about here in Poland, maybe you get the American evangelical dramas, but they're horrible. They're just, you know, they make me cringe. Even some of the Catholic stuff, you know, it's okay, it's nice, but they just did a movie. It was called Father Stew. I don't know if it's made it here to Poland yet, but if you listen to it in English, it's quite foul. I mean, the language, but it's the story of this man who has a deep, real conversion and becomes a priest, but he came from a life that was very hard, and he used very coarse language. Well, they produced this. This is Mel Gibson, and who's the Wahlberg, you know, who's done, Mark Wahlberg, who does all these movies. He produced this, and a lady came up to me, and it was advertised in all the churches. They hadn't seen it, and it was advertised in all the churches, and one of the ladies in my parish came up, she said, I was horrified by that movie, it's terrible. And I said, it wasn't written for you. It was written for people outside the church to be captivated by it. And I think we need to produce, I'm not all in favor of bad language. My brother was an actor, by the way, and he used very bad language and didn't do Christian movies, I'll tell you that. But what we need to do is do art that is compelling and real. Again, I keep going back to that, but that's where the beauty needs to be seen. The beauty can be seen in the midst of brokenness. Sometimes it's the most compelling thing to do. So we need to have formation on how to write, how to engage the culture, and to do that, to go back to your point, we need to understand the idiom of the culture around us without getting contaminated by it, and that's where prayer comes in, and confession.
Just another remark. I was thinking about the beauty so much, so many times. What happened to our churches? What happened to our churches? Why do we leave our beautiful Gothic, whatsoever, beautiful historical churches, and we go to stadiums? Why are we going to stadiums, to the ugly stadiums? How can I evangelize? How can I talk how wonderful God is? How can I talk how beautiful the creation is supposed to be if I leave my beautiful cathedral in Tarnów and I go to a stadium? Why? That's a question to you.
Another angle on your question, because I agree with you. Part of what motivated me to write the little 15-minute talk that I gave at the beginning of my session was to say this is what we are positively in favor of, to give a compelling picture of Christian family life, that every child, whether they're rich or poor, black or white, every child should have their mother and father. This is a very tangible, material thing, but it's a beautiful thing, right? And a lot of times we spend a lot of time arguing against our opponents, and we need to do that, a certain amount of it, but we also need to spend some time presenting what we're positively for. And this is what John Paul was the master of. John Paul II, he was tremendous at that. And if you really think about it, the Christian vision of the family, the Christian vision of the human person is very appealing. It's very beautiful to believe that you exist because God loved you into existence. That's how we all got here. Our opponents believe that we got here for no particular reason at all, and we're a bunch of atoms just bumping into each other, which, by the way, is kind of our description of our sex lives at this point. You know, our view of the cosmos and our view of marriage and the family are bumping right into each other. You know, they're paralleling each other. So not all of us can write movies, not all of us can build buildings, but in whatever endeavor you're in, I would encourage you to think about what is the positive good that you have to offer and present that as often as you can. Yes, refute the evil, but don't get too hung up in it. If you see what I mean, you know, do your best to get out of that and back into what is positive.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time, but okay, there was one last question. Please try to be brief.
Thank you. I have one question. Po polsku już powiem. Mam pytanie odnośnie, jak wiemy, w 1990 roku WHO, czyli World Health Organization, wykreślono z ICD-10 czy DSM-5, wykreślono jednostkę chorobową zaburzenia homoseksualnego, tak? Więc jako my specjaliści, czyli psycholodzy, czy terapeuci, czy nawet osoby pomagające, tak? Jak możemy się do tego odnieść w tym momencie, pomagając tym osobom? Dziękuję.
Professor Morse? You would like to answer, Professor Morse?
You poor kid. I feel your pain, as we would say in English. Yes, this is a big problem. In the United States, it was done in 1973. And in both of those cases, it was done not with science. It claims that it's about science, but it was really done by activists. And it was done for precisely the reason that you mentioned, you know, to normalize certain behaviors. And, oh, by the way, it's now harder to actually help somebody who wants to be helped. And there are plenty of people who want to be helped. This is a big problem. At the Ruth Institute, we are involved in, indirectly, we're involved in the battles around the country and around the world over so-called conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is the English term of derision. And what they want to say is that it's not possible for people to change their sexual orientation. If a person has a transgender idea, it's not possible to change that, and it's harmful to try. That's what they're trying to say. So we recommend using the term sexual orientation change efforts or change allowing therapy to move the ball a little bit. What am I trying to say? To try to level the rhetorical playing field a little bit, right? And also, we're involved in some research. My colleague, Father Paul Sullins, whom I know some of you are familiar with, Father Paul Sullins, he's our resident sociologist. He has written several papers showing that sexual orientation change efforts, that type of therapy can be helpful to people, not only in changing their sexual orientation, but also in changing their overall mental health and propensity to have suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts, which is the exact opposite of what the kind of people you're talking about want to say. And so that research, it's been published in decent places. We try to promote his research wherever we can, but as you may imagine, no one in the mainstream media wants to talk about it, right? Everybody wants to talk about the paper that said, oh my gosh, they'll commit suicide, you know, if you don't do what we tell you, you're going to commit suicide. And then when that paper is retracted because there were statistical errors in that paper, nobody wants to report on the retraction, right? Nobody wants to report on the fact that there were flaws in the study and so on and so forth. But if this issue is of concern to you, I would encourage you to follow us at the Ruth Institute, because we periodically publish this type of material, the scientific studies, statistical analyses, right? Not just one guy talking, but statistical analyses. And we also produce interviews with people who are what we sometimes call ex-gays, right? People who have lived that lifestyle and walked away from it. We've published interviews with therapists. All of this type of information to make it available so that people who want to change can do so. And I will say this, in the United States, the men and women who say, I was once gay and I'm not gay anymore. Those people are the most vilified, marginalized people in society. They get criticized and attacked and labeled from all sides. Nobody wants to believe that they exist. Their existence is a threat, right, to the narrative. And I will also say that some of those men and women, they are among the holiest people that I know, because they have sinned and they are truly repentant. And you know, some of them are really damaged and weak and broken and everything else, but some of them, well, maybe some of the same people, they're also very holy people. So if you know people like that, I would encourage you to, you know, to be encouraging with them and supportive of them and so on and so forth, because they need it, and nobody else will. And you know, the people in this room are the people who are going to be supportive of people in that situation.
Thank you, Professor. Father
Yeah,
Sirico?
I'll try to make this very brief. I don't know the articles that you've referred to, and I'd be very interested in reading them. I have found in the case of the homosexual orientation debate, it very intriguing to go back before the 1950s. There's a book that was written, I think, in 1902. It's called The Invert, I think was the name of the book. It's written in English. And what's interesting is it gives you a whole window into how people with same-sex orientation looked at their life at the time. I think one of the most potent weapons in the gay movement was the concept of coming out, the whole concept of identity, which now, of course, we see, you know, it's borrowed again from Marxism, the identifying yourself in a class of people. It's a very powerful thing, and it's explanatory to a certain, at a certain level. It explains things to people that they're experiencing. So I think what needs to happen is we need to shift the whole way in which this thing is being talked about. We all have proclivities of various kinds, and some proclivities that will never go away. And it's from a moral point of view and from a sociological and familial, social point of view and familial point of view, it is not imperative that the orientation be eviscerated. And I'm not at all sure that that's possible in a person who's a little older and who's had some experience in this. That's not what's essential. What's essential is that they come to understand a truth that all of us can agree on, and that is that we cannot act on all of our proclivities. We have to curtail our proclivities at various times. Now we can debate what those contexts are. So I think this entire paradigm needs to be shifted in the same way that the gay movement was able to construct this paradigm of the coming out and the explanatory. We need to create a language that explains better the human experience of same-sex orientation, because it's not just same-sex orientation here. The debate needs to now, and it's as you alluded in your paper, is moving to pedophilia. And I'm of the conviction that pedophilia is a sexual orientation. And when you say this in the gay context, they go up the wall because they don't want to have that compared. But the parallels are very clear, that it's a very powerful impulse over which people have no control in terms of the desire, but what they can do is curtail the behavior. And in curtailing the behavior and understanding this other broader cultural reality, namely repentance, they can improve their well-being and their happiness. Let me just say one caveat. We have to be very careful how we approach this with kids, because kids do isolate themselves, or at least they did. I don't know what's going on in the culture now because it's so crazy. But a kid who can't talk about this to somebody, who can hear them, first hear them, and let them know that they're loved regardless, that kid is at risk for self-harm. And so I think we have to be very careful and loving in the way we speak to young people without endorsing every impulse that they have. There's much more to be said. You could have a whole conference on this.
Indeed.
Actually, that was going to be my mystery topic. I was going to talk, I have a bunch of slides on pedophilia. That's all.
Well, I'm sure you
I'm
can.
going to send them to you.
Yeah, please do. You can make them available in order to continue the
They're
conversation.
perfectly legal. They're perfectly legal. Possibly clandestine, perhaps, but I know you. Actually, all of our material is illegal in one sense of the word. You know, come on, I'm a real rebel.
I think we have the very last question right now.
Do we have time? Because
and let's
time is
answer
up.
to this last question before we go for the refreshment.
Yes, Len, please stay with us for a refreshment, and we'll have a concert in a little bit more than half an hour, maybe in
Okay,
an hour.
we need a half an hour break, so half an hour after we finish this session,
There
we'll
is a
start the concert.
by Joanna Słowinska, if I
Yes.
pronounce it well.
But we still have the last question, so let's...
Okay, if we can stay in the room, okay, let's take one
Proszę
more question.
Państwa, pytanie z kategorii o nadziei. Jak Państwo uważają, czy Polska ma szansę w Unii Europejskiej obronić swoje prawodawstwo? Wiemy, jakie ataki są i przykre, że też dołącza się lewica do tego, ale czy mamy szansę obronić naszą ustawę o ochronie życia z 1993 roku i czy Polska w Unii Europejskiej nie będzie za to nadal karana, że nie zmienia tej ustawy? Pamiętamy też wyrok Trybunału Konstytucyjnego, który podtrzymał obronę życia. Dziękuję.
Dr. Rzegocki?
Nie wiem. Odpowiedź jest nie wiem. Nie wiem, ale jeżeli będziemy wystarczająco wytrwali i wystarczająco uparci, pojawia się nadzieja.
A czy w tym może pomóc nam medialnie prawica z innych krajów, Stany Zjednoczone? Czy to będzie dostrzegalne w literaturze i w mediach?
I don't want to be a pessimist, but no, especially not in the media. Especially not in the media. I don't think you'll get a lot of support. We're in a very difficult moment, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'd rather be a realist than an optimist. Optimist is just seeing things. What's the reality on the ground? The work we have to do is not primarily legislative. It's primarily cultural. And having said that, you said you need to be stubborn enough. The Polish people know how to be stubborn. You brought down communism. And if you can bring this together again, now again, I don't know that you know, he's in heaven, but he's still with us. So we just have a long fight ahead of us. I just want to be realistic about it. Protect your families. That you have control over. And get families together with families to protect families, just like you're doing through your foundation. And then let's rebuild this whole cultural thing so that these kinds of things, when they're brought up, are laughed out of the room before they get any traction.
One thing.
Oh, okay. One thing.
The European
Dr.
Union is not
Contreras.
competent about right to life. It doesn't pertain to the competences, to the powers of the European Union. So do not let the European Union overrule your marvelous legislation of protection of life. You are a reference for defenders of life all through the West, because Poland is the only country, at least in Europe, that upholds the right to life legally. So do not let the European Union abuse you. And you have the sympathy of all pro-life defenders everywhere, including my party, which is, of course, completely sympathetic of the with the national sovereignty of Poland against the interference, the abusive interference of the European Union.
Doktorze Rzegocki.
Dziękujemy panu profesorowi, panu posłowi za wyrazy wsparcia, wyrazy tego właśnie współczucia, o którym mówił. I teraz, proszę Państwa, dwie informacje. Za pół godziny rozpocznie się koncert. W międzyczasie zapraszam Państwa na poczęstunek i proszę o zdanie zestawów słuchawkowych. To jest ten moment, w którym firma obsługująca nas od strony tłumaczeń musi otrzymać swój sprzęt z powrotem. I jeszcze jedna rzecz. We foyer, w holu znajdują się ulotki infolinii bezpłatnej, informacyjno-interwencyjnej dla rodzin, którą prowadzi Fundacja Auxilium, gdzie wspieramy rodziny pozostające w kryzysie, w trudnościach, której hasłem jest: zanim się rozwiedziesz, zadzwoń. Proszę pobrać te ulotki, proszę Państwa, rozdystrybuować w swoich wspólnotach, w swoich środowiskach, w swoich rodzinach. Każdy członek rodziny, nie tylko małżonkowie, który potrzebuje pomocy, wsparcia fachowego, konserwatywnego doradztwa, może zadzwonić na bezpłatny numer 800 800 607. Ulotki są we foyer. Dziękuję bardzo, dziękuję Solène Tadié za motywację.
Thank you very much to all of you for following us today. It was a very dense, intense conversation, discussion about the institution of the family in times of transition. So thank you again all for your presence, and it will continue, God willing, tomorrow. So please stay with us for a little while, a little bit longer for this refreshment. And yeah, please attend the concert as well. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję uprzejmie.